Rain hammered the glass towers of downtown Chicago like bullets as Samantha Vale stared at the pregnancy test trembling in her hand, two pink lines glowing back at her. She'd spent 30 years being invisible, the overweight executive assistant buried beneath oversized blazers and spreadsheets nobody thanked her for. In the brutal world of Korean mafia boss Jae-min Kang, invisibility kept you breathing. One reckless night in a blood-soaked panic room had destroyed all that. Before she could shove the test into her purse, the bathroom door exploded inward. Wood splintered. Hinges screamed. Jaemin stood in the doorway like death incarnate. 6'2", charcoal suit perfect despite the destruction, dark eyes burning with something that made her knees weak. His gaze dropped to the test in her shaking hand. "You're carrying my child," he said. Not a question, a verdict. Samantha backed against the marble sink, heart jackhammering. She opened her mouth to beg, to resign, to disappear, to run so far he'd never find her. Jaemin crossed the space between them in 2 strides and grabbed her waist, pulled her against his chest hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. "You don't run from me," he whispered against her hair. "What's mine stays under my protection." Within an hour, Samantha was ripped from her quiet studio apartment and transported to Jaemin's fortress estate overlooking Lake Michigan, not as his secretary anymore, as the mother of the heir to Chicago's most dangerous criminal empire. And she was about to learn the real danger wasn't the enemies trying to kill him. It was the obsession growing inside the man who refused to let her go. If you want to see how this twisted love story survives betrayal, bloodshed, and impossible choices, follow this story to the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Samantha's journey reaches across the world. Vosamk. 6 months earlier, Samantha Vale had been nothing. Less than nothing. The kind of woman people look through instead of at. She sat hunched at her cramped desk on the 42nd floor of Blackthorn Global Holdings, shoulders rounded forward, navy blazer 2 sizes too big, drowning her soft frame. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision while her mind stayed carefully blank. Around her, sleek executives in tailored suits strode past without a glance. To them, she was furniture, a breathing filing cabinet that processed encrypted ledgers, bribery schedules, and illegal shipping manifests without asking questions. That invisibility had kept her alive for 3 years inside Jae-min Kang's empire. Samantha knew exactly what Blackthorn Global really was. Everyone who worked above the 30th floor knew. The legitimate real estate acquisitions and venture capital investments were window dressing. Beneath the glass and steel, the Kang family controlled Chicago's underworld with ruthless precision. Drug distribution networks stretching from Koreatown to the South Side, protection rackets bleeding dry every business from Chinatown to Little Italy, weapon shipments moving through O'Hare like clockwork. Jae-min Kang sat at the center of it all, like a spider in an expensive suit. Samantha had only spoken to him directly, maybe 20 times in 3 years. Each interaction left her shaking. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His presence filled whatever room he entered like smoke, suffocating, inescapable, absolute. Dark eyes that stripped you down to your worst fear, a voice like ice cracking over deep water. He was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp, cold, deadly. And Samantha made damn sure he never noticed her as anything other than the assistant who kept his books clean and his operations invisible to federal oversight. The day everything changed started like any other. Samantha arrived at Blackthorn Tower at 6:30 in the morning, earlier than anyone except the night security crew rotating shifts. She rode the elevator to the executive floor carrying her usual oversized tote bag, stuffed with granola bars and a battered thermos of cheap coffee. The building hummed with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. She settled at her desk and pulled up the latest shipping manifests from the Port of Chicago. 3 containers flagged for inspection. Normal. Samantha rerouted the paperwork through a shell company in Delaware and adjusted the customs timestamps. The containers would clear by noon. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen, Jae-min's head of security. Boss wants the November ledgers. His office. 10 minutes. Samantha's stomach clenched. She saved her work, grabbed the encrypted tablet containing the syndicate's financial records, and stood. Smoothed down her shapeless blazer. Tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear even though nobody would notice. The walk to Jae Min's corner office felt like walking toward execution. His assistant, a razor-thin woman named Diana, who looked at Samantha like she was something stuck to her shoe, barely glanced up. "He's expecting you. Go in." Samantha knocked once, soft, apologetic. "Enter." She pushed open the heavy door and stepped into Jae Kong's domain. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline like a conquered kingdom. Minimalist furniture, black leather, steel and glass. Everything in the room screamed power and control, and behind the massive desk sat the king himself. Jamin didn't look up from the document he was reading. Early 30s, though his eyes looked older. Sharp-featured, elegant in the way some predators were elegant. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from stone and bad decisions. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Samantha made in 3 months. "The ledgers," he said without looking at her. Samantha crossed the room on shaking legs and placed the tablet on his desk, stepped back immediately. Created distance. Jamin's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Cicero route is bleeding money," he said flatly. 3 shipments intercepted in 2 months. Explain." Samantha's throat went dry. She'd flagged that route in her internal notes, but hadn't included it in the official report. Hadn't wanted to draw attention to herself by pointing out problems above her pay grade. "The local distributor changed management," she managed. "The new crew doesn't have the same police connections. I drafted a memo suggesting I don't need a memo. I need a solution." His eyes finally lifted to hers. Dark. Unreadable. Terrifying. Samantha forced herself to hold his gaze for exactly 2 seconds before looking down. Submissive. Invisible. "Cut the Cicero route entirely," she said quietly. "Reroute through the south side using the Hernandez network. They have cleaner law enforcement ties and better distribution infrastructure. You'd lose maybe 10% in short-term revenue, but eliminate the exposure risk entirely." Silence filled the office like pressure before an explosion. Then Heyman leaned back in his chair. Something that might have been surprise flickered across his face before vanishing behind his usual mask. "How long have you been tracking this?" 5 weeks. "And you didn't report it?" It wasn't a question. Samantha's heart hammered against her ribs. "I wasn't sure if... I didn't want to waste your time if I was wrong." "You weren't wrong." He closed the tablet with a soft click. "Implement your solution. Quietly. If the Hernandez network asks questions, tell them I approved the expansion personally." Samantha nodded and turned to leave before he could change his mind. "Miss Vale." She froze halfway to the door. "Next time you identify a problem, you bring it to me immediately. Your job isn't to avoid wasting my time. Your job is to make sure my empire doesn't bleed. Understood?" "Yes, Mr. Kang." She escaped into the hallway with her pulse pounding in her ears. That should have been the end of it, a brief flicker of acknowledgement before she faded back into invisibility. Instead, it was the beginning. Over the next 3 weeks, Jae Min started pulling Samantha into meetings she had no business attending. Strategy sessions with his captains, conference calls with dirty politicians and corrupt union bosses. He didn't explain why, didn't acknowledge her presence beyond the occasional sharp question about logistics or financial projections. But he listened when she spoke, and the other men in those rooms started noticing her. Not as a woman. Samantha had long ago accepted that men like them didn't see women like her that way, but as someone whose opinion mattered to the boss. It was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. Then came November 16th. Samantha was working late, alone on the 42nd floor except for the skeleton security crew. The rest of the executive team had left hours ago. She was buried in spreadsheets, tracking a complex money laundering scheme through 18 shell companies, when the first gunshot echoed through the building. For a split second, her brain refused to process the sound. Offices didn't have gunshots. Offices had staplers and printers and awkward small talk in the break room. Then the second shot cracked through the air, closer this time, and every survival instinct Samantha possessed screamed at her to move. She dropped beneath her desk just as the elevator doors across the floor opened with a cheerful ding. Men poured into the hallway, 6 of them, military gear, suppressed rifles, moving with brutal efficiency toward Jamin's office. This wasn't a robbery. This was an execution. Samantha's hand shook so badly she could barely pull her phone from her purse. No signal. They'd jammed the cell towers. Of course they had. The gunman moved past her desk without a glance. She was furniture, invisible. But Jamin wasn't invisible. More gunfire erupted from the direction of his office, shouting, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. Then silence, the kind of silence that came after something irrevocable. Samantha should have stayed hidden, should have waited for the killers to leave and then run for the emergency stairs. Instead, she found herself crawling across the floor toward Jamin's office. Her mind screamed that she was being an idiot, that Jamin Kang was a monster who'd probably killed more people than she'd ever met, that he wouldn't do the same for her. But her body kept moving. The hallway outside his office looked like a war zone. Bullet holes punched through drywall, blood sprayed across abstract paintings worth 6 figures. 2 of Jamin's security guards sprawled dead near the elevator, their weapons still holstered. They'd never had a chance. Samantha pressed herself against the wall and peered through the shattered remains of Jamin's office door. He was alive. Barely. Jamin knelt behind his overturned desk, one hand pressed against his side where blood soaked through his white shirt. His suit jacket lay crumpled on the floor. In his other hand, he gripped a pistol aimed at the doorway. 3 bodies in tactical gear lay scattered across his office. He'd taken down half the assault team before they'd wounded him, but the remaining gunmen were regrouping in the hallway. Samantha could hear their harsh breathing, their clipped tactical communications. They'd breach again in seconds. Jamin's eyes met hers through the doorway. For one frozen moment, Samantha saw something she'd never seen before in those dark eyes. Not fear. Jamin Kang didn't do fear, but something close. A flicker of recognition that this was how it ended. "Run," he mouthed at her. Instead, Samantha crawled through the doorway into his office. "What the hell are you doing?" Jamin's voice came out rough with pain. "Saving your life. Panic room. Now. They'll breach in 30 seconds. Then we move in 20. Samantha grabbed his arm and hauled upward with strength she didn't know she had. Jamin grunted but pushed to his feet, keeping his pistol trained on the doorway. Blood dripped down his side onto the expensive carpet. The panic room entrance was concealed behind a sliding bookshelf in the corner. Samantha had filed the security codes months ago. Her fingers shook as she punched in the 12-digit sequence. The bookshelf slid open with a soft hiss. Behind them, boots thundered in the hallway, shouted orders, the metallic click of fresh magazines being loaded. Jamin shoved Samantha through the doorway first, then followed, spinning to fire 3 shots back into his office. Someone screamed. Then he slammed the panic room door shut and spun the manual lock. The steel door was 8 inches thick, bulletproof, blast-resistant. They could pound on it for hours and never get through. But sealed inside, the space was barely 12 feet square. Red emergency lighting cast everything in hellish shadows. A small cache of weapons mounted on one wall. Surveillance monitors showing empty hallways. A first aid kit. Bottled water. That was it. Jamin collapsed against the wall and slid down to the floor, leaving a streak of blood behind him. Samantha dropped to her knees beside him and ripped open the first aid kit with shaking hands. "Let me see." Jamin pressed harder against his wound. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding out. Move your hand." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then he lowered his hand. The bullet had torn through his side just above his hip, deep enough to be dangerous, but it had missed anything immediately fatal. Samantha had no medical training beyond basic first aid, but she'd spent her whole life being practical and useful and good in emergencies. She grabbed gauze and medical tape, tore open antiseptic packets with her teeth. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts." But Jamin's voice was steadier now. He watched her with an intensity that made her hands shake worse. Samantha pressed folded gauze against the wound and wrapped medical tape around his torso to hold pressure. Her fingers brushed against bare skin, surprisingly warm despite the blood loss, and she tried not to think about the fact that she was touching Jamin Kang. Tried not to notice the way his breathing changed when her hands moved across his ribs. Outside the panic room, muffled gunfire echoed through the building. Shouting, the sound of doors being kicked in. The assault team was searching floor by floor. "They won't find us," Jamin said quietly. "This room isn't on any blueprints, and my security team will respond within 15 minutes. If your security team is still alive." Jamin's jaw tightened. "They are. Marcus Chen doesn't die easily." Samantha finished taping the bandage and sat back on her heels. Her hands were covered in his blood. Her blazer was ruined, She was trapped in a tiny room with a wounded crime lord while assassins hunted them both. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt weirdly calm, like some part of her had been waiting her whole life for a crisis that matched the constant anxiety humming beneath her skin. "Why didn't you run?" Jamin asked. Samantha looked at him. Really looked at him. Without his suit jacket and perfectly styled composure, he looked almost human. Vulnerable. The kind of man who could bleed and hurt and die like anyone else. "I don't know," she admitted. "Stupid, probably. Brave." His eyes held hers. "Most of my own soldiers wouldn't have done what you just did." "Most of your soldiers are smarter than me." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps." The surveillance monitors flickered. One showed the hallway outside his office, empty now. Another showed the lobby, chaos, security guards exchanging fire with the remaining assault team. A third showed the parking garage where a black SUV sat with its engine running. Escape vehicle. "They came prepared," Jamin murmured. "Military-grade equipment, coordinated breach. This wasn't some rival crew trying their luck. Someone with serious resources wants me dead." "Do you know who?" "I have a list." His voice turned cold. "It's not a short list." Samantha pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her shaky and exhausted. "How long do we wait?" "Until it's safe. And if it's never safe." Jamin looked at her for a long moment. Then he shifted closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the blood loss. "Then we stay here together until the end." The red emergency lighting cast shadows across his face that made him look like a fallen angel, beautiful and damned. And Samantha realized with a jolt of pure terror that somewhere in the last hour she'd stopped being invisible to him. The next 3 hours passed in suffocating silence. They watched the monitors as the assault team finally retreated, dragging their dead with them. Watched as Jamin's security forces swept the building floor by floor. Watched as police sirens lit up the street below, bought-off cops who'd take statements and file reports and never investigate anything that mattered. Jamin made a single phone call using the panic room's encrypted line. Marcus Chen confirmed 4 guards dead, 11 injured, the building secure. He promised a full tactical sweep before unlocking the panic room. Then silence again. Samantha's body ached from sitting on the cold floor. Her mind spun in circles, replaying the gunfire, the blood, the terrible moment when she'd made the decision to crawl through that doorway instead of running for her life. "You should sleep," Jamin said quietly. He'd been watching her for the last 20 minutes without speaking. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted, and we might be here until morning. Security protocols." Samantha laughed. A thin, brittle sound. "I'm trapped in a panic room with a mafia boss after watching people die. I don't think sleep is happening." "Then talk to me." She looked at him in surprise. "About what?" "Anything. I've spent 3 years barely noticing you existed. That was a mistake." His voice carried something she'd never heard before. Not quite remorse, but close. "Tell me something true." Samantha's throat tightened. The question felt like a trap, like exposing her soft underbelly to a predator. But something about the red lighting and the blood and the proximity to death made honesty feel inevitable. "I've been invisible my whole life," she said quietly. "I was the fat girl in school nobody wanted on their team, the assistant nobody remembered at office parties. I learned to take up as little space as possible because taking up space meant getting hurt." She met his eyes. "Working for you was perfect because you never looked at me long enough to see anything worth destroying." Jamin's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm terrified that you're seeing me." "Why?" "Because men like you don't see women like me unless they want something, and I don't know what you want." Jamin moved closer, slow enough that she could have pulled away but didn't. "You saved my life tonight," he said softly. "You could have run, should have run. Instead, you crawled through gunfire to drag my bleeding body to safety. You think I don't see that?" "I think you see what's useful to you." "You're right." His hand came up to cup her face, rough fingertips against her soft cheek. "I do see what's useful. And you, Samantha Vale, are the most dangerous kind of useful." Because you're invisible to everyone except me. His thumb brushed across her lower lip. Samantha's breath caught. This was insane. This was her boss. This was a man who'd killed people with his bare hands. This was a situation that would destroy her if she let it. But when Jaemin leaned forward and kissed her, she didn't pull away. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined kisses could be. Not gentle or romantic or sweet. It was desperate and fierce, and tasted like blood and adrenaline and survival. His hand tangled in her hair. Her fingers clutched his shoulders, careful of his wound but needing to hold on to something solid in a world that had tilted sideways. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Jaemin rested his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "Probably. You should forget this happened." "I should." But neither of them moved. And when he kissed her again, harder this time, Samantha let herself fall into the disaster she knew was coming. What happened next wasn't planned, wasn't smart, wasn't anything either of them could justify in the cold light of morning. But trapped in that suffocating red darkness with death lingering outside the door, they reached for each other with the kind of desperation that came from staring into the void and choosing to feel something, anything, instead of nothing. Haimin's hands moved across her body like he was memorizing every curve he'd ignored for 3 years. Samantha's fingers traced the hard planes of his chest, careful around the bandaged wound, mapping territory she'd never thought she'd touch. They didn't speak. Couldn't speak. Words would have broken whatever spell held them together in that moment. The panic room floor was cold and unforgiving, but neither of them cared. And somewhere in the tangle of need and fear and impossible intimacy, Samantha stopped being invisible. Hours later, when Marcus Chen finally unlocked the panic room door and flooded the space with harsh white light, Jaemin was on his feet immediately. Composed, cold, the wounded Mafia king back in perfect control. He didn't look at Samantha as he gave orders to his security team. Didn't acknowledge her as he strode through the destroyed office toward the private elevator that would take him to the penthouse medical facility. Diana appeared with a designer wool coat and draped it around Jaemin's shoulders like he was royalty. And just like that, Samantha was invisible again. She stood in the panic room doorway with her ruined blazer and blood-stained hands while the Empire moved around her like she'd never existed. Marcus Chen handed her a black duffel bag. "Fresh clothes. Bathroom's down the hall. There'll be a car waiting to take you home in 20 minutes. You didn't see anything tonight. Understood?" Samantha nodded numbly. She changed in the executive bathroom, scrubbing blood from beneath her fingernails until her skin turned raw. The woman staring back from the mirror looked hollowed out, used up. She pulled on the oversized sweater and jeans from the duffel bag and stuffed her ruined clothes into the trash. The car ride home passed in a blur. Her studio apartment felt like a stranger's space. She stood in the shower until the water ran cold, trying to wash away the feeling of Jaemin's hands on her skin. It didn't work. For the next week, Samantha moved through her life like a ghost. She showed up to Blackthorn Tower every morning at 6:30, sat at her desk, processed encrypted ledgers and bribery schedules and illegal shipping manifests exactly like she'd done for 3 years. Jaemin never called her into his office, never acknowledged her in the hallway, never looked at her during the single strategy meeting she attended. It was like the panic room had never happened, like she'd imagined the whole thing. Samantha told herself it was better this way, safer. She'd gotten a glimpse behind the curtain and survived. That was enough. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she could still feel the ghost of his touch burning across her skin, and some traitorous part of her wanted it back. 2 weeks after the attack, Samantha sat at her desk reviewing shipping manifests when a wave of nausea hit her so hard she barely made it to the bathroom. She threw up until there was nothing left, sat on the cold tile floor with her head spinning and her stomach twisted in knots. Food poisoning, she told herself. Bad takeout. But the nausea came back the next morning, and the morning after that. By the 4th day, dread had replaced confusion. Samantha stopped at a pharmacy on her way home from work, paid cash for 3 different pregnancy tests, locked herself in her apartment bathroom, and took all 3 at once because she needed to be absolutely sure. 2 pink lines appeared on the first test, then the second, then the third. Samantha sat on the bathroom floor with the tests lined up in front of her like accusation made plastic, and stared at the proof of the most catastrophic mistake of her life. She was pregnant with Jaemin Kong's child. and he didn't even remember she existed. Samantha spent the next 3 days locked in her apartment staring at those pregnancy tests like they might change if she looked hard enough. They didn't. She called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, ignored the automated HR emails asking for documentation, sat on her couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like stale coffee and defeat, while her phone buzzed with notifications she couldn't bring herself to check. The reality was simple and catastrophic. She was carrying the child of Chicago's most dangerous crime lord, and he'd dismissed their night together like it was a stress-induced hallucination his brain had conjured to cope with almost dying. Samantha had exactly 3 options, and all of them were terrible. Option 1, terminate the pregnancy. Walk into a clinic, handle it quietly, and never tell Jae-min anything. Return to being invisible, safe, alive. Option 2, keep the baby and run. Disappear into some small town where the Kang syndicate's reach couldn't find her. Raise this child alone and spend every day looking over her shoulder, waiting for the moment someone recognized her. Option 3, tell Jae-min the truth and let him decide what happened next. That last option made her stomach twist harder than the morning sickness, because Samantha had no illusions about what she was to Jae-min Kang. She'd been useful for one desperate night in a panic room. A warm body when he needed to feel alive after staring down death. Nothing more. Men like Jae-min didn't have relationships with women like her. They had transactions. And this baby was a complication he'd eliminate with the same cold efficiency he used to handle every other problem in his empire. On the 4th morning, Samantha's phone rang. Not a text. An actual call. Marcus Chen's name glowed on the screen. Her hand shook as she answered. Hello? Miss Vale, Marcus's voice was professionally neutral. You've missed 3 days of work without proper notification. Mr. Kang wants to know if there's a problem. Samantha's throat closed. Of course, Jae-min had noticed her absence, not because he cared, but because disruptions in his operation annoyed him. I've been sick, she managed. I'll be back tomorrow. See that you are. Mr. Kang doesn't appreciate unreliability. The line went dead. Samantha sat holding her phone and felt something dark and bitter rise in her chest. Unreliability. That's what her crisis was to him, an inconvenience. She looked down at her still flat stomach and made a decision that was probably going to destroy her. She was keeping this baby, and she was telling Jae-min the truth. Not because she expected anything from him, not because she harbored some delusional fantasy that he'd suddenly transform into a man capable of love or commitment or basic human decency, but because this child deserved to know where it came from. And Samantha was tired of being invisible. If Jae-min Kang wanted to erase her, he'd have to look her in the eye while he did it. The next morning, Samantha returned to Blackthorn Tower with the positive pregnancy test sealed in a small envelope buried at the bottom of her purse. She rode the elevator to the 42nd floor feeling like she was ascending toward her own execution. The executive floor had been completely repaired in the 2 weeks since the attack. New drywall, fresh paint, replacement artwork. You'd never know people had died here. That was how the Kang Empire worked. Blood got cleaned up. Bodies disappeared. Life continued like violence was just weather that occasionally rolled through. Samantha settled at her desk and pulled up her backlog of work. 3 days of missed emails. Shipping manifests that needed rerouting. Payment schedules that required updating. She buried herself in spreadsheets and tried not to think about the envelope in her purse. At 11:30, her phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Mr. Kang wants to see you. Now! Samantha's heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed the envelope and stood on legs that felt like they might collapse, smoothed down her blazer with trembling hands. This was it. Diana's expression was even more disdainful than usual when Samantha approached. He's in a meeting. Wait here. Samantha stood in this hallway outside Jae-min's office for 20 excruciating minutes while muffled voices drifted through the heavy door. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was tense, angry. Finally, the door opened and 3 men in expensive suits filed out. Jae-min's captains, the brutal enforcers who handled the syndicate's street-level operations. They glanced at Samantha without interest and disappeared toward the elevators. You can go in now, Diana said with a smirk that suggested she knew Samantha was about to get fired. Samantha stepped into Jae-min's office. He stood at the windows with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the Chicago skyline like he owned every brick and broken dream in the city below. His suit was charcoal gray today, perfectly tailored, not a hair out of place. The bandage from his gunshot wound was long gone. He looked untouchable again. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Samantha obeyed. The soft click of the latch sounded like a cell door locking. "You missed 3 days of work." "I was sick." "Were you?" Still not a question. Jamin turned to face her, and his dark eyes were completely unreadable. "Marcus tells me you didn't provide documentation." "I didn't think a stomach bug required a doctor's note." "Everything in my organization requires documentation, Miss Vale. I don't accept gaps in my records." He moved behind his desk and sat down with controlled precision. "Are you actually sick, or are you having second thoughts about your position here?" The question landed like a blade between her ribs. Samantha's fingers tightened around the envelope in her hand. "I need to tell you something." "Then speak." She crossed the office on shaking legs and placed the envelope on his desk. Jamin looked at it without touching it. "What is this?" "Open it." For a long moment he just stared at the envelope like it might explode. Then he picked it up and tore it open with sharp, efficient movements. The pregnancy test fell onto his desk. 2 pink lines screamed their verdict against the dark wood. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a building collapsed. Jamin stared at the test without moving, his expression carved from stone. Samantha couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only watch as the reality sank into him. Finally, he looked up at her. "You're pregnant." "Yes." "And it's mine." There hasn't been anyone else. The admission tasted like humiliation. "Ever." Something flickered across Jamin's face too quickly to identify. He leaned back in his chair and studied her with the same cold assessment he used to evaluate business deals. "How far along?" "About 3 weeks. The night in the panic room. I remember." His voice cut through hers like a knife. "What do you want from me?" The question was so blunt it knocked the air from her lungs. "I don't want anything," Samantha said quietly. "I just thought you should know." "Bullshit." Jamin stood and circled the desk with predatory grace. "No woman tells a man like me she's carrying his child unless she wants something. Money, protection, a ring." He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Name your price." Rage flared hot and sudden in Samantha's chest. "You think I want to trap you? You think I planned this?" "I think accidents are convenient when they involve powerful men and disposable women." The words hit like a physical blow. Samantha stepped back, blinking against the sudden burn behind her eyes. She'd expected coldness, expected rejection, but she hadn't expected casual cruelty designed to gut her where she stood. "I'm not disposable," she said, and her voice shook. "And I didn't come here for money. I came here because this baby is half yours, and you deserve to know. That's it." "Then what do you plan to do?" "Keep it, raise it myself. You don't have to be involved." Jamin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think it's that simple? You think you can carry the heir to my empire and just walk away?" "I'm not carrying your heir, I'm carrying my child. Our child is the same thing." He grabbed her arm, not rough enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. "Do you understand what you are now, Samantha? You're a target. Every rival crew in Chicago will come for you the moment they find out. Every enemy I've made will see you as leverage. You think you can protect this baby alone in your studio apartment? I'll move, change my name, disappear. You can't hide from me." His grip tightened. "And if you can't hide from me, you can't hide from anyone else." Samantha tried to pull free. "Let go." "Not until you understand the situation." Jamin's face was inches from hers now, his voice dropping to something dangerous and possessive. "That child is mine, which means you're mine. And what's mine stays under my protection whether you want it or not." "I don't need your protection. You needed it 3 weeks ago when armed men tried to kill me in this office. You needed it every day for 3 years while you processed my illegal operations. You just didn't know it." He released her arm and stepped back. "Pack your things. You're moving to the estate tonight." Samantha's brain stuttered. "What?" "You heard me. I'm not leaving the mother of my child exposed in some apartment building with a broken security lock and neighbors who'd sell you out for $500. Jamin pulled his phone from his pocket and typed something quickly. Marcus will handle the logistics. You'll have a suite in the East Wing with 24-hour security. Medical staff will monitor your pregnancy. You'll want for nothing. I'm not moving into your house. It's not a request. You can't just decide, I can and I have. Jamin's eyes were black ice. You're carrying my heir, Samantha. That makes you the most valuable asset in my empire, and I protect my assets. The word asset landed like poison. Samantha felt something crack open inside her chest, some small, foolish part of her that had hoped he might see her as more than a complication to be managed. I'm not an asset, she whispered. I'm a person. In my world, you're whatever I say you are. Jamin returned to his desk and picked up the pregnancy test, examining it like it was a document requiring his signature. Be grateful I'm not handling this the way most men in my position would handle it. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Samantha's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. If you're threatening, I'm not threatening anything. I'm telling you how this is going to work. He dropped the test in his desk drawer and locked it. You'll move to the estate. You'll be protected, provided for, and monitored. When the baby is born, we'll reassess the situation. Until then, you do exactly what I tell you. Understood? No. The word came out stronger than Samantha felt. I'm not a prisoner. You're not. You're the mother of my child, and you'll be treated with the respect that position demands. Jamin's expression didn't soften. But make no mistake. If you try to run, I will find you. If you try to hide this child from me, there's no place on earth you can go where my reach won't follow. Your safest option is to accept my protection and stop fighting me. Samantha's vision blurred. This wasn't protection. This was a cage dressed up in designer furniture and armed guards. I need time to think. You don't have time. Every hour you're unprotected is an hour my enemies can move against you. Jamin glanced at his watch. Marcus will be at your apartment at 6 to help you pack. I suggest you cooperate. And if I refuse, then I'll have you moved by force. His voice was perfectly calm. I'd prefer not to traumatize you, Samantha, but I will do whatever is necessary to protect my child. The dismissal was clear. Samantha turned and walked toward the door on legs that barely held her weight. Her hand was on the doorknob when Jamin spoke again. One more thing. She didn't turn around. What happened in the panic room was a mistake driven by adrenaline and proximity to death. It won't happen again. Your position in my household is purely practical. Don't confuse protection with anything else. Samantha left without answering. She made it to the bathroom before the tears came. Marcus Chen arrived at Samantha's apartment at exactly 6 o'clock, with 2 additional security personnel and enough moving boxes to pack up her entire life. Samantha had spent the last 6 hours sitting on her couch in a state of numb shock, staring at her small studio apartment and trying to figure out how she'd lost control of her entire existence in under an hour. Miss Vale. Marcus's expression was professionally sympathetic. I understand this is difficult, but Mr. Kang's orders are clear. He's treating me like property. He's treating you like the mother of his child. Marcus gestured to his team. We'll handle the packing. You just need to identify what's essential. Essential for what? Prison? The estate is hardly a prison. You'll have freedom within the grounds, access to anything you need, and protection most people would kill for. Marcus picked up one of her battered paperbacks and placed it carefully in a box. Mr. Kang takes care of his own. I'm not his. You're carrying his child. That makes you more his than anyone else in this city. The truth of that statement made Samantha want to throw up. She watched numbly as the security team efficiently dismantled her life. Her books, her clothes, her grandmother's quilt. Everything she owned fit into 8 boxes, a depressing testament to how small her world had been before Jamin Kong had shattered it. Within 90 minutes, her apartment was empty. Marcus guided her to a black SUV with tinted windows idling at the curb. She climbed into the back seat and stared out the window as Chicago blurred past, the city she'd lived in for a decade, now feeling like foreign territory. The drive to Jamin's estate took 40 minutes. They left the dense urban neighborhoods behind and wound through increasingly wealthy suburbs before finally turning onto a private road flanked by tall iron gates. Security cameras tracked their approach. Armed guards waved them through. And then the mansion appeared. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress dressed up as elegance. Sprawling stone and glass perched on a cliff overlooking Lake Michigan, surrounded by manicured grounds and enough security infrastructure to withstand a military assault. Samantha had known Jamin was wealthy, but seeing the physical manifestation of his power made her stomach clench. This was the world she'd stumbled into, a world where privacy was surveillance and protection was control. Marcus led her through the grand entrance and down a hallway lined with artwork that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor and stopped at a heavy oak door. "Your suite," Marcus said, pushing the door open. The room beyond was beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. King-sized bed with silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a sitting area with a couch and reading chair, an ensuite bathroom bigger than her entire studio apartment, and in the corner, mounted discreetly near the ceiling, a small black security camera. Samantha's hands curled into fists. "The camera is for your protection," Marcus said, following her gaze. "Mr. Kang monitors all entrances and common areas." "Not the bathroom?" "No, you'll have privacy there." He placed a tablet on the bedside table. "This controls the lighting, temperature, and window shades. There's also a direct line to security if you need anything. Meals are served in the main dining room at 7, noon, and 6. If you prefer to eat privately, kitchen staff can bring food to your suite." "Am I allowed to leave this room?" "You're not a prisoner, Miss Vale. You're free to move throughout the estate. The grounds are secure. Just stay within the perimeter walls." Samantha laughed, a broken sound. "So I'm free as long as I stay trapped." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Kang is not an easy man, but he protects what's his. You could do worse." "I could do better. Perhaps, but you're here now, and fighting him will only make this harder." Marcus moved toward the door. "Medical staff will check on you tomorrow morning. Try to rest." He left, and the soft click of the door closing sounded like a coffin lid sealing shut. Samantha stood in the center of her beautiful cage and tried to breathe through the panic crushing her chest. She thought telling Hyman the truth would give her some measure of control over her situation. Instead, she'd handed him every bit of power she'd ever had and gotten nothing in return except luxury-coated captivity. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from an unknown number. "Don't try to leave, it won't end well for you." Samantha stared at the message, blood turning to ice. Then she looked up at the security camera in the corner of her room. Jamin was watching, and she was utterly, completely trapped. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of suffocating routine. Samantha woke each morning to soft knocking at her door. A young woman named Min Seo, who worked as her personal attendant, bringing breakfast and cheerfully informing her of the day's schedule. Medical appointments, nutritionist consultations, security briefings about which parts of the grounds were off-limits during shift changes. Samantha was treated like precious cargo that needed constant monitoring. She rarely saw Jamin. He was a ghost in his own fortress, occasionally glimpsed through windows as he climbed into armored vehicles or heard through walls during tense phone conversations in Korean that Samantha couldn't understand. When they did cross paths in hallways, he barely acknowledged her beyond a curt nod, like she was furniture again, invisible despite being the center of his obsessive protection protocols. The isolation was worse than any physical cage. Samantha tried to fill her days with books from the massive library, walks through the carefully manicured grounds, anything to keep her mind from spiraling. But the reality was inescapable. She was alone, pregnant, and trapped in a world she didn't understand by a man who saw her as an obligation instead of a person. Late one night, unable to sleep, Samantha wandered down to the library on the first floor. The room was dark except for moonlight streaming through tall windows. Shelves of leather-bound books stretched toward the ceiling. It smelled like old paper and expensive whiskey. Samantha was reaching for a book when she heard voices drifting from the half-open door connecting the library to Jae-min's private study. She should have left, should have respected his privacy. Instead, she moved closer and listened. "Don't care what it costs." Jamin's voice was cold and controlled. "I want full background on everyone who's had access to this estate in the last 6 months. Someone is feeding information to our rivals." "You think we have a mole?" Marcus Chen's voice. "I know we do. The Santos crew knew exactly when our shipment was moving through the port of Chicago. That information never left this building. A pause. And now they're asking questions about Samantha. Samantha's breath caught. How much do they know? Marcus asked. Enough to be dangerous. Word is spreading that I'm keeping a woman at the estate. They don't know about the pregnancy yet, but it's only a matter of time. Jamin's chair scraped across the floor. Double her security detail. No one gets near her without my explicit approval. And if they make a move, then we make an example that reminds everyone in this city what happens when they threaten what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice made Samantha's skin prickle. She started to back away from the door when another voice joined the conversation. A woman's voice, sharp and cutting. You're making a mistake, Jamin. Samantha froze. Your opinion wasn't requested, Serena. My opinion is the only one that matters. I'm family. The woman's voice dripped with barely contained contempt. This girl is a liability. Some overweight secretary you knocked up in a moment of weakness. And now you're restructuring your entire security apparatus around protecting her? Watch your tone. Or what? You'll cut me out like you cut out your own brother? A harsh laugh. You've let one night of bad judgment compromise everything we've built. The captains are talking. They think you've gone soft. The captains think what I tell them to think. They think you're distracted, weak, and they're right. Serena's voice turned venomous. Your bastard child changes nothing. My son has more claim to this empire than some half-breed mistake you created with a woman you barely looked at for 3 years. The sound of glass shattering made Samantha flinch. Say one more word about her. Jamin's voice was lethal quiet. And I will personally put a bullet between your eyes, sister-in-law or not. Silence crashed through the study. Then Serena's voice, colder now. You're going to regret choosing her over family. Footsteps. The study door opening and slamming shut. Samantha pressed herself against the library wall, heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Serena Kang. Jamin's sister-in-law. Bitter, dangerous, and clearly threatened by Samantha's existence. The pieces started falling into place. The security leaks, the rival crews sniffing around, the sense that something inside the estate was rotting from within. Samantha needed to tell Jamin what she'd overheard, but when she finally worked up the courage to knock on his study door, it was locked. And by morning, Jamin was gone, off handling business according to Minseo, his return time undetermined. 3 days later, Samantha discovered something that made her blood turn to ice. She was walking through the East Wing Gardens when she overheard 2 security guards talking in Korean near the service entrance. Samantha didn't speak Korean, but she recognized certain words, names, numbers, and the word for baby. The guards fell silent when they noticed her, bowing respectfully before disappearing into the estate, but the damage was done. That night, Samantha broke the one rule Jamin had explicitly given her. She accessed the estate's security network using the tablet Minseo had left in her room. The tablet wasn't supposed to give her admin access, but Samantha had spent 3 years processing encrypted syndicate operations. She knew how to find back doors. Within 20 minutes, she was inside the system. What she found made her want to throw up. Security logs showing a pattern of 1-minute blackouts in the West Wing surveillance every Thursday at 3 p.m. Override codes traced back to an administrative account registered to Serena Kang. Maintenance records showing unauthorized access to the estate's panic room systems. And buried in encrypted messaging logs, a conversation between Serena and an unknown number discussing eliminating the complication before it becomes permanent. Samantha's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. They were planning to kill her, or worse, kill the baby. She needed to tell Jamin immediately. But he was still gone, unreachable, handling whatever crisis demanded his attention this week. And every day she waited was another day Serena could move against her. Samantha made a decision that was probably stupid, but felt inevitable. She was done being helpless, done waiting for someone else to protect her, done letting powerful people decide whether she lived or died. If Heyman's own family wanted her dead, she was going to gather every scrap of evidence she could find and confront the threat herself, even if it destroyed her. On Thursday afternoon at 2:45 p.m., Samantha walked calmly toward the west wing of the estate. Minseo tried to stop her. Miss Vale, that area is restricted during security rotations. I need to speak with Mrs. Kang. Mrs. Kang isn't receiving visitors. She'll receive me. Samantha pushed past the attendant and walked down the hallway with her pulse thundering in her ears. She had 15 minutes before the security blackout. 15 minutes to get answers before whatever Serena was planning went into motion. She found Serena Kang in an elegant sitting room overlooking the lake, sipping tea like she didn't have blood on her hands. Serena looked up when Samantha entered. Tall, beautiful in a cold, angular way, dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Samantha's entire wardrobe. Her dark eyes assessed Samantha with open contempt. "The pregnant secretary," Serena said softly. "To what do I owe this intrusion?" Samantha pulled the tablet from her bag and placed it on the coffee table. "I know what you're planning." Serena's expression didn't change. "Do you? The security blackouts, the override codes, the messages about eliminating complications." Samantha's voice shook but held steady. "You're going to kill me. Or try to." Serena set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "You think very highly of yourself. Why would I waste resources on someone as insignificant as you?" "Because my baby threatens your son's claim to the empire. Your bastard threatens nothing. It's a mistake Jamin will correct once he's thinking clearly." Serena stood and circled Samantha like a predator evaluating prey. "Do you really think he cares about you? You're a convenience, like a warm body he used when he was weak. The moment that child is born, you'll be discarded like the trash you are. Then why are you so threatened?" Serena's face hardened. "I'm not threatened. I'm insulted. My husband built this empire alongside Jamin. My son has royal blood. And now some fat nobody thinks she can waltz in and claim a piece of what doesn't belong to her?" The venom in the woman's voice made Samantha's stomach clench. "I'm not claiming anything. You're carrying a weapon against my family whether you realize it or not." Serena moved closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "And weapons get neutralized before they can be used." Samantha's hand moved to her stomach. "If you touch me—" "I won't touch you. I don't need to." Serena smiled coldly. "Accidents happen, Miss Vale. Falls down staircases, food poisoning, mysterious complications during pregnancy. Jamin can't watch you every second. And when you're gone, he'll mourn appropriately and move on. Men like him always do." "I've already sent the evidence to Jamin." "No, you haven't, because you're stupider than I thought." Serena picked up the tablet and dropped it into her tea. The screen flickered and died. "You came here thinking you could threaten me with your little discoveries, but you have no idea how power actually works in this world." Samantha backed toward the door. "He'll figure out what you did. He'll believe whatever I tell him to believe. I'm family. You're a temporary inconvenience." Serena's eyes glittered with malice. "I'd suggest you leave the estate tonight. Run somewhere far away and never come back. Because if you're still here when the sun rises tomorrow—" The door behind Samantha exploded inward with a deafening crash. Jamin stood in the doorway and his face was carved from absolute fury. Behind him, Marcus Chen and 4 armed security guards fanned into the room. "Step away from her," Jamin said quietly, and the quiet was more terrifying than any shout. Serena's composure finally cracked. "Jamin, I can explain. I heard every word." He moved toward Samantha, his eyes never leaving Serena's face. "The security blackout you've been exploiting every Thursday. I've been monitoring it for 3 weeks, waiting to see who was stupid enough to betray me in my own house." Samantha's knees went weak. Jamin wrapped one arm around her waist, steadying her while keeping his other hand on the pistol at his belt. "You were testing her," Serena breathed. "I was protecting what's mine." Jamin's voice was colder than Samantha had ever heard it. "And you just confirmed everything I needed to know." Serena lunged forward, and chaos erupted, but Marcus was faster, grabbing her arms and forcing her to her knees while guards surrounded them. Jamin turned to Samantha, his dark eyes burning with something she couldn't name. "We're leaving," he said, "right now." But before they could move, the windows behind them shattered inward as armed men in tactical gear crashed through the glass, and the entire world exploded into gunfire and blood, and the realization that Serena's betrayal was just the beginning of something far worse. Glass exploded inward like 1,000 glittering knives as the windows disintegrated under the impact of boots and rifle butts. Samantha's scream died in her throat as Jamin shoved her behind him, his pistol already drawn and firing before her brain could process what was happening. 3 men in black tactical gear dropped through the shattered windows. No, 4, moving with military precision that made the previous assassination attempt look like amateur hour. Suppressed weapons coughed death across the elegant sitting room. Marcus Chen returned fire while dragging Serena toward the door, but she was fighting him, screaming something in Korean that got lost beneath the chaos. Jamin's hand was iron around Samantha's wrist, dragging her toward the hallway while his pistol barked twice, 3 times. One of the tactical team went down hard, helmet cracking against marble. But more were coming through the windows. Too many. Too fast. "The server room," Jamin shouted at Marcus. "Get her to the server room now." "What about you?" "I'll hold them here. Move." But Samantha's feet were rooted to the floor because she'd just seen something that made her entire world tilt sideways. The tactical team leader yanked off his helmet, and beneath it was a face she recognized from security briefings. Park Jin-ho, one of Jae-min's most trusted captains. A man who'd sat at the dinner table 3 nights ago discussing shipping routes and police payoffs. Park's eyes locked onto Jae-min with cold hatred. "You should have stayed out of our business," Park said in accented English. Jae-min went absolutely still. "Jin-ho. This isn't personal, boss, just economics." Park raised his rifle. "The Santos crew is paying better than you these days, and they're very interested in making sure your heir never draws breath." Everything happened at once. Marcus shoved Serena aside and tackled Samantha to the ground as gunfire tore through the space where she'd been standing. Jamin dove behind an overturned sofa and fired 3 shots that forced Park and his team into cover. Alarms screamed through the estate. More guards were coming, but they'd be too late. Samantha's ears rang with the percussion of violence. Her hands pressed against the cold marble while Marcus hauled her toward the doorway. She caught a glimpse of Jamin's face as he reloaded, absolutely focused, terrifyingly calm. A man who'd spent his entire life learning how to survive moments like this. Then they were in the hallway, running. Marcus had his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders in Korean while keeping one hand locked around Samantha's arm. Estate guards flooded past them toward the gunfire. Somewhere behind them, Serena was screaming threats and accusations that nobody was listening to anymore. The server room sat at the heart of the estate, a fortified bunker designed to protect the digital backbone of Jae-min's empire. Steel doors, biometric locks, air-gapped systems that couldn't be hacked remotely. Marcus slammed his palm against the scanner and the doors hissed open. He shoved Samantha inside and turned back toward the chaos. "Lock it from the inside. Don't open this door for anyone except Mr. Kang or me. Understood?" "What about Jae-min?" "He's buying you time. Use it." Marcus's expression was grim. "If we don't make it back, there's an emergency exit behind the server rack. Leads to the underground garage. Keys are in the lockbox. Code is your birthday. Drive north, and don't stop until you hit the Canadian border." He was gone before Samantha could respond. The steel doors sealed shut with a sound like a tomb closing. Samantha stood alone in the humming darkness of the server room, surrounded by blinking lights and the soft whir of cooling fans, while gunfire echoed through the walls like distant thunder. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely breathe. Jae-min's most trusted captain had betrayed him. How many others had turned? How many of the men she'd seen patrolling the estate were actually enemies waiting for the right moment to strike? She pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling the small curve that had barely started to show, and fought down the wave of panic threatening to drown her. The baby. She had to protect the baby. That was all that mattered now. Samantha forced herself to move. The server room's main terminal glowed in the corner, 3 massive monitors displaying live security feeds from across the estate. She dropped into the chair and pulled up the camera system with fingers that fumbled across the keyboard. The screens filled with violence. The sitting room where they'd been standing minutes ago was a war zone. Bodies on the floor, Jae-min behind cover, trading shots with Park's team, more guards flooding in from both sides, blood spreading across expensive carpet like spilled wine. Samantha cycled through other cameras. The main entrance breached. Armed men in tactical gear storming through the front gates. Estate security fighting back but outnumbered. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a full-scale invasion. Her eyes found the garage camera. 8 black SUVs with Santos crew markings parked in formation. This was coordinated, planned. Someone had given them access codes, guard rotations, blind spots in the security grid. Someone inside the estate had sold them all out. Samantha's gaze drifted to the archived security logs on the second monitor. Her hands moved across the keyboard almost unconsciously, pulling up the data she'd discovered earlier. Serena's security blackouts, override codes, communications logs. But now she was looking deeper. Following the digital breadcrumbs past the obvious evidence Serena had left behind, and she found something that made her blood turn to ice. The override codes trace back to Serena's administrative account. Yes, but beneath that authorization was a secondary signature. Someone who'd given Serena the access in the first place. Someone with root privileges to the entire system. The signature belonged to Marcus Chen. Samantha stared at the screen, her brain refusing to process what she was seeing. Marcus, Jaemin's head of security, his most trusted advisor, the man who'd been orchestrating the defense of this estate for 3 years, the man who'd just locked her alone in a fortified room while chaos consumed everything around her. Samantha's hands flew across the keyboard, pulling up more logs. Communications records, financial transactions, encrypted messages routed through offshore servers. The evidence assembled itself like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Marcus had been feeding information to the Santos crew for 6 months. Detailed intelligence about shipments, payroll schedules, safe house locations. Every major operation the Kang Syndicate had lost in the last half year could be traced back to information only Marcus had access to. He'd been planning this for a long time, and Samantha had just let him seal her inside exactly where he wanted her. The security feeds showed Marcus in the main hallway now, coordinating with estate guards, directing defensive positions, looking every inch the loyal soldier protecting his boss's empire. But Samantha noticed something the cameras barely caught. A subtle hand signal Marcus flashed to one of the guards near the south entrance. The guard broke formation and disappeared toward the service corridors, heading toward the server room. Samantha's heart slammed against her ribs. She had maybe 3 minutes before they breached the doors. Maybe less. The emergency exit Marcus had mentioned suddenly felt less like salvation and more like a trap. He'd told her exactly where to run, which meant he'd be waiting there. Or worse, the exit led straight into the hands of whoever was paying him. Samantha pushed back from the terminal, her mind racing through impossible options. She could stay here and hope Jaemin survived long enough to reach her. But if Marcus had sold him out, if half his security force had turned, Jaemin might already be dead. Or she could run. Trust her own instincts instead of anyone else's instructions. She moved to the emergency exit door and pressed her ear against it. Silence on the other side. Too much silence. Samantha's gaze fell on the lockbox Marcus had mentioned. Birthday code. She punched in the numbers with shaking hands. Her birthday, because of course Marcus knew it. He knew everything about her. And the box clicked open. Inside were car keys, a burner phone, and a 9mm pistol with 2 spare magazines. Samantha had never fired a gun in her life. She picked it up anyway. The weight was terrifying and oddly comforting. She checked the magazine the way she'd seen Jaemin do it 100 times. Fully loaded, safety off. A soft beep echoed from the main server room door. Someone was overriding the biometric lock. Samantha made her decision. She grabbed the keys and phone, shoved the pistol into the waistband of her pants, and moved to the emergency exit. Her hand hovered over the handle. Every instinct screamed that opening this door was suicide. But staying was certain death. Behind her, the main doors hissed open. Samantha shoved through the emergency exit and ran. The corridor beyond was narrow and industrial, bare concrete walls, exposed pipes, emergency lighting casting everything in sickly yellow. Service tunnels that ran beneath the estate like veins beneath skin. Samantha's footsteps echoed too loud. Her breathing sounded like thunder. She forced herself to move quietly, following the tunnel as it sloped downward toward what she hoped was the underground garage. Behind her, voices echoed, Korean curses. Someone had discovered she'd run. The tunnel split into 3 directions. No signs, no maps. Just darkness and the distant sound of pursuit. Samantha chose the middle path because it angled downward more steeply and ran. Her lungs burned. The baby. She had to be careful with the baby, but careful didn't matter if she was dead. The tunnel opened into a maintenance area, storage cages filled with supplies, old furniture, boxes of files that probably dated back decades. And at the far end, a metal door marked with faded text, Garage Access, Authorized Personnel Only. Samantha's hand was on the door handle when she heard the voice behind her. Stop right there, Miss Vale. She froze. Marcus Chen stepped from behind one of the storage cages, his pistol raised but not quite aimed at her. His expression was calm, almost apologetic. I was hoping you'd trust me, he said quietly. Would have made this easier. Samantha's hand moved toward the gun in her waistband. Marcus tracked the movement and raised his weapon. Don't. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to. You sold us out. Her voice shook. Everything. The security blackouts, the Santos crew, Park's betrayal, all of it traces back to you. I sold out J-Min, Marcus corrected. You were never supposed to be part of this. You were just the invisible secretary. But then you got pregnant, and suddenly you became valuable. He moved closer, gun steady. Walk back toward the server room, slowly. So you can kill me there instead? So I can keep you alive long enough to deliver that baby. The Santos crew wants J-Min's heir. They're willing to pay 7 figures for the child and your silence. Marcus's expression didn't change. You can raise your baby in comfort somewhere far from Chicago. All you have to do is cooperate. And J-Min won't survive the night. I'm sorry, Samantha. I know you developed feelings for him, but he was always going to die. Men like him burn bright and fast. Marcus gestured with his pistol. Now move. We don't have much time before the estate falls completely. Samantha's fingers brushed against the pistol at her waistband. She'd never fired a gun. Didn't know if she could hit anything if she tried. But Marcus was standing 15 feet away and the tunnel behind him was dark, and she was out of options. Why? She asked, stalling. You've been with him for years. He trusted you. He paid me well. The Santos crew is paying me better. Marcus shrugged. Loyalty is expensive, Miss Vale, and everyone has a price. Not everyone. Everyone, Marcus repeated. You just haven't found yours yet. Samantha pulled the gun. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. The barrel wavered between Marcus's chest and the wall beside him. She'd never pointed a weapon at another human being. Every instinct screamed at her to lower it, to apologize, to be the invisible woman who didn't cause trouble. But that woman was dead. She'd died the moment she'd crawled through gunfire to save J-Min's life. Put it down, Samantha. Marcus's voice was patient. You don't know how to use that. And even if you get lucky and hit me, you'll never make it out of this estate alive. There are 40 trained soldiers upstairs, and half of them are mine. Then I'll die trying. Think about the baby. I am. Samantha's finger moved to the trigger. My baby isn't growing up knowing their mother was too much of a coward to fight back. Marcus's expression hardened. He raised his pistol to her chest. Last chance. The gunshot that followed didn't come from Samantha's shaking hands. It came from behind Marcus. The bullet punched through his shoulder and spun him sideways. His weapon clattered across the concrete. Marcus collapsed against the storage cage, clutching his wound, shock and rage warring across his face. J-Min stepped from the shadows at the tunnel entrance, his pistol still raised, his suit jacket torn and blood-stained, but his hands perfectly steady. You always were predictable, Marcus, J-Min said coldly. I told you where the emergency exit led. Knew you'd be waiting here. Marcus coughed, blood staining his teeth. You used her as bait. I used her as proof. I needed to know who I could trust. J-Min moved past Marcus without looking at him and reached for Samantha. Give me the gun before you shoot yourself. Samantha's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it. J-Min gently took the weapon from her grip and secured it at his belt. Then he pulled her against his chest, one arm wrapped tight around her waist. You're okay, he murmured into her hair. I've got you. Samantha's knees buckled. The adrenaline was crashing out of her system all at once, leaving her hollow and shaking. She pressed her face against his blood-stained shirt and tried not to fall apart. How many? She managed. Half my security force. Park's entire crew. Most of my senior captains. J-Min's voice was flat. The ones still loyal are securing the estate now. The Santos team is in retreat. We won. He pulled back enough to look at her face, but we lost almost everything. Serena? In custody. Her betrayal was real enough. She just wasn't the architect. His eyes cut to Marcus, who was still slumped against the storage cage, bleeding. That honor belongs to the man I trusted most. Marcus laughed, wet and broken. You're finished, J-Min. Even if you survive tonight, the other families smell blood. They'll come for you, all of them. Let them come. Jamin raised his pistol. Wait. Samantha's hand caught his arm. Don't. Jamin looked at her in surprise. He sold us out, tried to kidnap you, would have taken our child. I know what he did. Samantha's voice steadied. But killing him makes you the same as everyone else in this world. And I need you to be different. For a long moment, Jamin just stared at her. Then he lowered the gun. You're right. He stepped back and nodded to the guards who'd appeared behind him. Take him. Medical attention, then isolation. I'll decide what to do with him later. They dragged Marcus away, his protests echoing down the tunnel until they faded into nothing. Samantha and Jamin stood alone in the maintenance area, surrounded by the debris of a life that had just been torn apart. I need to get you out of Chicago, Jamin said quietly. Tonight. The estate isn't safe anymore. Half my organization just tried to kill us. Until I rebuild from the ground up, you're exposed. Where would we go? Somewhere they can't find us. I have safe houses in 3 countries. He touched her face gently. But you need to understand what that means, Samantha. If you run with me, you become a target for every enemy I've ever made. There's no going back to your old life. I lost my old life the moment I walked into that panic room. Something shifted in Jamin's expression, something that looked almost like regret. You should have run when you had the chance. Probably. Samantha managed a weak smile. But I'm terrible at making smart decisions. Jamin pulled her against him again, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Samantha let herself believe they might actually survive. But the relief lasted exactly 30 seconds. A new voice echoed through the tunnel, young, scared, belonging to one of the estate guards. Mr. Kang, the surveillance room, you need to see this now. They ran. The surveillance room was chaos, screens flickering with camera feeds showing every corner of the estate. Dead bodies being carried out, medical teams treating wounded guards, fire crews extinguishing flames in the West Wing where Park's team had set charges. But the young guard was pointing at one screen in particular, the main gate camera, a convoy of vehicles approaching, not Santos crew, not police. Something worse, black sedans with federal plates. FBI? Samantha breathed. Worse! Gaiman's face had gone absolutely white. That's a joint task force, FBI, ATF, state police. Someone tipped them off about tonight's attack. He turned to the guard. Who called them? We're trying to trace it, but it was me. Everyone turned. Minseo stood in the doorway, Samantha's young attendant, looking small and terrified but standing straight. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. I called them, she repeated. I've been an undercover federal agent for 18 months, and everything I've seen, everyone I've recorded, it's enough to put you away for life. The room went absolutely silent. Jamin's hand moved toward his pistol, but Minseo held up a small recording device. It's already uploaded, she said quietly. Encrypted servers, multiple backups. Kill me and you still go down. This ends tonight, Mr. Kang. One way or another. Samantha felt the world tilt sideways again. She'd spent weeks trusting Minseo, talking to her, confiding in her, and the entire time she'd been gathering evidence to destroy them all. Jamin's jaw tightened. How long until they breach the gates? 3 minutes. Then we have 3 minutes to disappear. He grabbed Samantha's hand. Come on. Where? The tunnels. There's an exit 2 miles from here. We can make it if we move now. But before they could run, a final voice stopped them cold. You're not going anywhere. Park Jin-ho stood in the doorway, his face a mask of blood and fury, his rifle raised. He'd survived. Somehow, impossibly, he'd survived. And now he was going to finish what he started. The feds can have what's left, Park said. But first, I'm collecting my payment. His rifle swung toward Samantha's stomach. Jamin moved faster than thought, shoving her behind him, his body a shield between the weapon and the woman carrying his child. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Samantha screamed, but Jamin didn't fall. Park did. Minseo stood behind him with a smoking pistol, her hands shaking, tears still streaming down her face. I'm a federal agent, she whispered, but I'm not a monster. Then she ran, and Jamin grabbed Samantha's hand and dragged her toward the only escape route left before the entire world collapsed around them both. The tunnel system beneath the estate was endless. Service corridors branching into maintenance shafts, storage areas connecting to emergency exits, a maze designed by paranoid architects who understood that men like Jamin always needed a way out. They ran through darkness lit only by emergency strips, their footsteps echoing against concrete while sirens wailed somewhere above them. Samantha's lungs burned, her legs screamed, but Jayamin's grip on her hand never loosened, and she forced herself to keep moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant losing everything. The tunnel finally opened into a narrow chamber containing a single rusted door marked "Condemned. Do not enter." Jamin kicked it open. Beyond lay a drainage culvert leading to the lake. They could hear water rushing somewhere in the darkness. Smell rotting vegetation and old stone. "This comes out 2 miles north," Jamin said, breathing hard. "There's a safe house, supplies, passports, cash, everything we need to disappear." Samantha looked back toward the estate they'd just abandoned, her home for 2 weeks. The place where she'd been protected and imprisoned in equal measure. Now it was a crime scene. A war zone. Evidence of everything Jamin had built being torn apart by federal agents and rival crews feeding off the corpse. "What about your empire?" she asked quietly. "Gone." Jamin's voice was hollow. "Marcus burned it all, and whatever he didn't destroy, the feds will finish." He touched her face gently. "But you're still here, and so is our child. That's all that matters now." Samantha pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the small life growing there. The baby that had triggered all of this chaos. The reason she was standing in a drainage tunnel instead of her quiet apartment. The future that terrified and sustained her in equal measure. "Where do we go?" she whispered. "Somewhere they'll never find us." Jamin took her hand again. "Somewhere you can be more than invisible. Somewhere I can be more than what they made me." "Is that even possible?" "I don't know." His dark eyes held hers. "But I'm willing to find out if you are." Samantha thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Overlooked, dismissed, buried beneath shapeless clothes and endless apologies. That woman would have run, would have taken the safe option and disappeared alone. But that woman had died in a panic room soaked in blood and adrenaline. The woman standing here now had crawled through gunfire, confronted killers, and survived betrayals that should have destroyed her. "Then let's find out together," Samantha said. They disappeared into the darkness of the drainage tunnel, while behind them the Kang Empire burned, and above them federal agents swarmed through the ruins, searching for ghosts that were already gone. And somewhere in that suffocating blackness, holding the hand of a man who'd lost everything to protect her, Samantha Vale finally understood what it meant to be seen, even if being seen meant becoming a target the entire world wanted to destroy. The drainage tunnel smelled like death and stagnant water. Samantha's shoes splashed through ankle-deep sludge that soaked through her clothes and made every step feel like dragging weights through quicksand. Her lungs burned from running. Her legs screamed for rest. But Heyman's hand stayed locked around hers, pulling her forward through suffocating darkness, broken only by his phone's flashlight beam cutting weak paths through the black. Behind them, somewhere in the maze of tunnels they'd left behind, voices echoed, shouting. Federal agents spreading through the estate's underground like poison seeping into veins. They'd been running for 20 minutes when Jamin finally stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels split off in different directions. He pressed his back against the concrete wall, breathing hard, blood from various wounds painting his torn shirt darker. 2 more miles, he gasped. The exit comes up in an abandoned industrial complex near the lake. There's a car waiting. How do you know they haven't found it? I don't. Jamin's expression was grim. But it's our only option. Samantha leaned against the opposite wall, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The baby. Through everything, the gunfire, the running, the terror, the baby had to be okay. We need to rest, she managed. We rest when we're out of Chicago. Jamin checked his phone. No signal down here. The feds will sweep these tunnels eventually. We have maybe an hour before they find this section. Then what happens to us? Jamin looked at her for a long moment. In the dim light, his face looked carved from exhaustion and something darker. Acceptance, maybe. Or defeat. Then we spend the rest of our lives in federal prison, he said quietly. You for aiding and abetting. Me for everything I've actually done. He touched her face gently. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose this. You chose wrong. Maybe. Samantha managed a tired smile. But it's my mistake to make. Jamin pulled her against his chest, and for just a moment they stood in that terrible darkness, holding on to each other like drowning people clutching debris. Then his phone buzzed. Jamin pulled it out and stared at the screen in disbelief. Somehow, impossibly, a text message had gotten through. A single line from an unknown number. North exit compromised. They're waiting for you. Only way out is back through the estate. Third sublevel, server room emergency tunnel. You have 30 minutes before it's sealed. Samantha's blood went cold. Marcus, he's still alive. Jamin's jaw tightened. And he's playing both sides to the end. It's a trap. Probably. Jamin looked at the message again, then at Samantha. But if the north exit is compromised, we're trapped down here anyway. The feds will sweep toward us from one direction. Santos' crew will come from another. We'll be caught between them with nowhere to run. So we go back? Into the estate that's swarming with federal agents? We go back into the one place they've already searched. Jamin started pulling her toward the tunnel leading back the way they'd come. They'll sweep the underground last. If we move fast, we can reach the server room before they lock it down. And if Marcus is lying, then we die. His voice was flat. But at least we die trying. They ran back through the tunnels, retracing their desperate escape, moving faster now because the alternative was waiting to be captured like rats in a cage. Samantha's lungs felt like they were tearing apart. Her legs threatened to collapse with every step, but she forced herself to keep moving because the alternative was losing everything. The tunnel junction that led back toward the estate appeared after 15 minutes of hard running. Jamin pulled up a schematic on his phone, some kind of architectural blueprint he'd stored offline, and traced their route with one finger. Third sublevel, he muttered. Server room emergency tunnel connects to the main drainage system here. He pointed at a junction point on the map. If we can reach it, it exits near the lakeshore. Private dock. There should be a boat. Should be? I haven't been down there in 3 years, but it was part of the emergency protocols. Jamin looked at her. It's a risk. Everything is a risk. Samantha's hand pressed against her stomach again. Let's go. They descended deeper into the tunnel system, following Jamin's map through passages that got narrower and more claustrophobic with every turn. The walls here were older, crumbling concrete and exposed rebar, dating back to when the estate had been built on the ruins of some industrial complex from the 20s. Finally, they reached a rusted door marked with faded lettering. Sublevel 3. Authorized access only. Structural hazard. Jamin forced it open with his shoulder. The hinges screamed in protest. Beyond lay a passage that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Water dripped from ceiling cracks. Mold spread across walls in black patches. The air tasted like rust and decay. This is insane, Samantha whispered. Welcome to my empire. Jamin's voice was bitter. Built on rotten foundations that were always going to collapse. They moved through the passage, their footsteps echoing too loud in the confined space. Samantha's heart hammered against her ribs. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made her flinch. The passage opened into a wider chamber, what looked like an old machine room from the industrial complex's past life. Massive rusted equipment loomed in the darkness. Pipes thick as tree trunks ran across the ceiling. And at the far end, barely visible in the dim light from Jamin's phone, was another door marked Server Room Emergency Access. They were halfway across the chamber when the lights came on. Blinding. Sudden. Flooding the space with harsh white light that made Samantha's eyes scream in protest. And standing near the emergency access door, surrounded by 6 armed men in tactical gear, was Marcus Chen. He looked terrible. Pale from blood loss, his shoulder wrapped in hasty bandages, but his eyes were sharp and his pistol was steady as he aimed it directly at Jamin's chest. I told you the north exit was compromised, Marcus said calmly. I didn't lie about that. Jamin pushed Samantha behind him. You're just full of surprises tonight. I've always been good at contingency planning. You taught me that. Marcus gestured with his weapon. Drop your gun. Slowly. Jamin hesitated, then carefully placed his pistol on the ground and kicked it toward Marcus's team. One of the tactical operators scooped it up immediately. Samantha's mind raced. 6 armed men, no weapons, no escape route except back the way they'd come, and federal agents were probably sweeping those tunnels by now. They were trapped. "What do you want?" Jamin asked coldly. "What I've always wanted, survival." Marcus moved closer, wincing slightly from his wounded shoulder. "You were going to execute me. The feds are going to arrest me. The Santos crew wants me dead for failing. I have exactly 1 asset left to bargain with." His eyes cut to Samantha. Her. Samantha's stomach clenched. "She's not an asset," Jamin said quietly. "She's carrying my child, which makes her extremely valuable to several interested parties." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them the screen. A text message. "The Santos crew is offering $2 million for her alive. They want the baby. Leverage against you for the rest of your life." He swiped to another message. "The feds are offering immunity and witness protection for her testimony against you. They want to dismantle what's left of your organization." But bombed. Another swipe. "And there's a third party, a rival Korean syndicate in Los Angeles, offering $3 million for both of you, dead or alive." "So you're auctioning us off?" Jamin's voice was absolutely flat. "I'm negotiating my survival. You understand that better than anyone." Marcus looked at Samantha. "I'm sorry it came to this. You seem like a decent person, but decent people don't survive in this world." "Then maybe this world needs to burn," Samantha said quietly. Marcus actually smiled. "It's burning right now. I'm just trying not to burn with it." "How long until they get here?" Jamin asked. "Whoever you sold us to." "Santos crew arrives in 15 minutes. They're moving equipment into position at the lake dock now." Marcus checked his watch. "Though I'm considering the LA offer, $3 million is hard to turn down. You won't live long enough to spend it. Neither will you." Marcus's expression hardened. "I gave you 3 years of loyalty, Jamin. Bled for you. Killed for you. And you paid me well. But loyalty has limits, and you crossed mine when you decided that secretary," he gestured dismissively at Samantha, "was worth more than the brothers who'd been with you from the beginning." "She saved my life." "So did I. Multiple times. Where's my mansion suite and 24-hour protection detail?" Marcus's voice turned venomous. "You made her more important than your own organization, and that's when I knew you'd lost your edge. When I knew the Empire was dying." Jamin was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You're right," he said softly. "I did choose her over all of you, and I'd do it again." "Then you're a fool." "Probably." Jamin's hand found Samantha's and squeezed gently. "But at least I'll die knowing I protected something that mattered instead of spending my life serving an empire built on blood and broken bodies." Marcus raised his pistol, touching. "But it changes nothing." That's when the explosion rocked the chamber. The blast came from somewhere above them, a massive concussive force that shook the entire underground structure like an earthquake. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. The lights flickered. One of Marcus's men stumbled and fell, and in the chaos, Jamin moved. He grabbed a piece of rusted pipe lying near the old machinery and swung it with brutal force into the nearest tactical operator's head. The man went down hard. Jamin caught his rifle before it hit the ground and spun, firing 3 shots that took down 2 more operators before they could react. Marcus dove for cover, shouting orders, but his team was scattered and confused by the explosion still echoing through the underground. Jamin grabbed Samantha's hand and dragged her toward the emergency access door. "What was that?" Samantha gasped. Either the feds breaching the estate with explosives or the Santos crew making their move early. Jamin kicked the emergency door open. "Either way, we're out of time." The passage beyond was narrow and steep, a metal staircase climbing upward into darkness. They took the stairs 2 at a time while gunfire erupted behind them. Marcus's remaining men were recovering, returning fire, but Jamin had gotten them enough of a head start. The staircase climbed for what felt like forever. Samantha's legs burned. Her lungs felt like they were collapsing, but she forced herself upward because stopping meant dying. Finally, the stairs ended at another door. Jamin slammed it open and they stumbled out into the mansion's main floor, or what was left of it. The elegant entry hall where Samantha had first arrived weeks ago was a war zone. Federal agents in tactical gear exchanging fire with what looked like Santos crew members who'd breached from multiple directions. Bodies on the marble floor. Blood sprayed across priceless artwork. The chandelier hanging crookedly from a ceiling, half collapsed by explosives. "This way!" Jamin pulled her toward a side corridor, but they'd barely taken 3 steps before someone grabbed Samantha from behind. She screamed. Jamin spun, rifle raised, but froze. Park Jin-ho stood behind Samantha with a knife pressed against her throat. He looked like a corpse that refused to die, face pale, multiple bullet wounds seeping blood through hasty bandages, eyes burning with hatred and pain. "Should have died when you had the chance," Park rasped. "But you always were too stubborn." "Let her go," Jamin said quietly. "Not until I get what I came for." Park pressed the knife harder against Samantha's throat. She felt the edge bite into her skin. "The Santos crew paid me $500,000 to deliver her alive. But at this point, I don't care about the money. I just want you to suffer the way you made me suffer." "I never made you suffer. I made you wealthy." "You made me your dog," Park's voice cracked. 12 years I served you. 12 years doing your dirty work while you sat in your mansion playing king. And what did I get? Scraps. While this nobody, he shook Samantha roughly, gets everything after one night in a panic room. Jamin's expression was absolutely cold. "Put down the knife, Jin-ho. This ends one of 2 ways. You let her go and I give you a 30-second head start before I come for you. Or you hurt her and I spend the rest of my life making sure your death is the most painful thing anyone in this city has ever witnessed." Empty threats from a man with no empire left. Park laughed, wet and broken. "You've lost everything. Your organization is destroyed. Your captains are dead or arrested. Your money is frozen. You're finished." "Maybe." Jamin lowered his rifle slowly. "But I can still kill you before you take another breath. So let's make a deal. You want revenge? Take it out on me. Cut me. Shoot me. Do whatever makes you feel better. But you let her walk away first." "Jamin, no," Samantha started. "Quiet?" His eyes never left Park's face. "This is between us. It always has been." Park's knife wavered slightly. "You'd die for her?" Without hesitation. "Why? She's nothing. Nobody." "She's everything." Jamin's voice was absolutely steady. "And if you kill her, you'll have to live with the knowledge that you murdered an innocent woman and an unborn child just to hurt me. That's not revenge. That's just being a monster." For a long moment, Park just stared at him. Then something shifted in his expression, some final thread of humanity pulling against the rage and pain. He lowered the knife. "You really love her," Park said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Park released Samantha with a rough shove. She stumbled forward into Jamin's arms. He pulled her behind him immediately, keeping himself between her and the threat. "Then you're weaker than I thought," Park said. "Love makes you vulnerable, makes you soft. It's why you're losing everything." "I've already lost everything." Jamin's eyes were dark. "Everything except her. And that makes me more dangerous than I've ever been." Park opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was going to say got cut off by 3 gunshots. He dropped to the floor, dead before he hit the marble. Marcus Chen stood in the corridor entrance, his smoking pistol still raised, his expression grim. "The Santos crew is breaching from the west wing," Marcus said flatly. "The feds are coming from the south. We're surrounded." "Why did you kill him?" Jamin demanded. "Because I just saved your life." "Again." Marcus lowered his weapon. "And because I realized something while watching you negotiate with a knife at her throat." "What's that?" "That you actually meant it. You'd die for her." Marcus looked at Samantha, then back to Jamin. "I've worked for you for 3 years, seen you manipulate, threaten, kill without hesitation. But I've never seen you love anything. Until now." He gestured around the destroyed mansion. "This empire is finished. We both know it. But maybe you get to walk away with something that matters." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's still one way out. The dock. There's a boat. It's fast and it's fueled." Marcus pulled a set of keys from his pocket and tossed them to Jamin. "You've got maybe 5 minutes before either the feds or Santos crew lock down the lake access." Jamin caught the keys, staring at Marcus in disbelief. "Why?" "Because I'm tired," Marcus said quietly. "Tired of killing, tired of running, tired of serving empires that eventually burn everyone who touches them. He looked at Samantha. You were right earlier. This world needs to burn. I'm just done trying to save myself from the fire. Come with us, Samantha said suddenly. Both men looked at her in surprise. You'll die here, she continued. Either the feds will arrest you or the Santos crew will execute you. But you just saved our lives. That has to count for something. Marcus smiled, tired and bitter. It doesn't count for anything. I've done too much, hurt too many people. I don't get to walk away into some new life. He turned back to Jamin. But you do. So take your woman and your unborn child and get the hell out of Chicago before it's too late. Gunfire erupted somewhere close, the sound of the final assault beginning. Go, Marcus shouted. Now! Jamin grabbed Samantha's hand and they ran. Through corridors filled with smoke and gunfire, past bodies of men who'd served the Empire and died protecting its corpse, through the shattered remains of elegance that had always been a facade covering violence and blood. They burst through a side door onto the grounds. The night air was thick with smoke from fires burning across the estate. Spotlights from helicopters, news crews, or federal surveillance, impossible to tell, swept across the property like searchlights hunting prisoners. The dock sat 200 yards away across open ground. We'll never make it, Samantha gasped. Yes, we will. Jamin raised his rifle. Stay behind me and don't stop running. They sprinted across the grass while bullets kicked up dirt around them. Samantha didn't know who was shooting, Santos crew or feds or Marcus's remaining men, but it didn't matter. Death was indiscriminate tonight, 50 yards from the dock, 40, 30. Something hot grazed Samantha's arm and she cried out. Jamin spun, fired 3 shots toward the muzzle flash and kept dragging her forward. 20 yards. 10. They hit the dock at a dead run. A sleek cigarette boat sat moored at the end, designed for speed, perfect for running. Jamin practically threw Samantha into the boat, then jumped in after her and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life with a throaty snarl. He cast off the lines with shaking hands and slammed the throttle forward. The boat leaped away from the dock like a racehorse breaking from the gate. Behind them, the estate blazed with fire and violence. Ahead, Lake Michigan spread dark and endless beneath the night sky. They were half a mile from shore when Samantha finally let herself believe they might actually escape. That's when she saw the speedboats coming. 3 of them, running dark without lights, closing fast from the south. Santos crew. Had to be. Coming to collect their bounty before the feds locked down the entire lake. Jamin, I see them. He pushed the throttle as far as it would go. Their boat screamed across the water, but the pursuing craft were gaining, faster, better equipped, purpose-built for exactly this kind of chase. What do we do? Jamin's expression was grim. Hold on. He cut the throttle and spun the wheel hard. Their boat turned sharply, circling back toward the pursuing craft in a move that made no tactical sense. What are you doing? Samantha screamed. Something stupid. He aimed their boat directly at the lead pursuit craft and opened the throttle wide. They were playing chicken on open water, racing toward each other at combined speeds over 100 miles per hour. Impact would destroy both boats, kill everyone aboard. The distance closed. 500 yards, 300, 100. At the last possible second, Jamin cut the wheel again and their boat veered sharply starboard. The pursuing craft tried to match the turn, but overcorrected. Their boat pitched sideways, caught its rail in the water, and flipped with devastating force. Men flew through the air like broken dolls. But the other 2 pursuit boats were still coming, and they were out of tricks. Jamin pushed the throttle forward again, heading for the Illinois shipping channel where larger vessels might provide cover. But he knew, they both knew, that it was only a matter of time before the faster boats caught them. That's when the helicopter appeared. It dropped from the night sky like a predator diving on prey. A police helicopter with spotlight blazing, loudspeaker booming across the water. This is the Chicago police. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. The Santos crew boats immediately peeled off, disappearing back toward the city rather than risk engagement with law enforcement. Samantha felt relief flood through her. They were saved. The police would arrest them, yes, but at least they'd be alive. Jamin didn't slow down. What are you doing? Samantha grabbed his arm. Stop! If we stop, we go to prison. You for harboring a criminal. Me for everything. His jaw was set. Our child grows up visiting us through bulletproof glass. If we run, they'll hunt us forever. Then we run forever. Jamin looked at her, and his eyes held something terrible and desperate. I've lost my empire, my organization, everything I built. But I'm not losing you. I'm not losing our child. He turned back to the water ahead. So we run until we can't run anymore. And when they finally catch us, at least we'll have tried. The helicopter spotlight tracked them across the dark water. More boats appeared in the distance, Coast Guard vessels mobilizing. They were surrounded, trapped on open water with nowhere left to hide. Samantha pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the small life growing there. The baby that had started all of this, the future she was fighting for, the reason everything had fallen apart and come together in equal measure. Where do we go? She whispered. Jamin's hand found hers on the throttle. Anywhere they can't find us, he said, or we die trying. And as Chicago blazed behind them and the forces of law and vengeance closed in from all sides, Samantha Vale made peace with the reality that her life had become running through darkness with a man who'd lost everything to keep her, carrying a child that would either save them or destroy them, racing toward an uncertain future where survival was measured in stolen moments between one desperate escape and the next. She was invisible no longer. She was hunted, wanted, feared, and somehow, impossibly, she was exactly where she needed to be. The boat's engine screamed across Lake Michigan, while the helicopter spotlight turned the dark water into a stage where their desperate flight played out for every law enforcement agency in the Midwest to witness. Samantha clung to the side rail with white knuckles, watching the Chicago skyline shrink behind them while Coast Guard vessels closed in from 3 directions. They had maybe 5 minutes before being surrounded completely. Jamin's face was set in grim determination, his hand steady on the wheel despite everything, the blood soaking through his torn shirt, the exhaustion carving lines into his features, the knowledge that this chase would end only one way. There! He shouted over the engine roar, pointing toward a cluster of industrial buildings along the shoreline ahead. Old steel mill, abandoned for decades. If we can reach it before they cut us off. Then what? Samantha's voice cracked. We hide in a condemned building until they flush us out? We buy ourselves time to think. There's no more time! The words tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Look around us, Jamin. We're surrounded. We've lost. Maybe it's time to... Don't say it. His eyes cut to hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. Don't you dare say we should surrender. Not after everything we've survived tonight. I'm thinking about the baby. So am I. Every decision I've made tonight has been about protecting you and our child. His jaw clenched. You think prison keeps you safe? You think witness protection keeps you hidden? The moment they separate us, you become vulnerable. The Santos crew has connections inside every federal facility in the country. They'll find you, and when they do... He didn't finish, didn't need to. Samantha pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the small curve there, barely noticeable yet, but growing, living, depending on them both to make the impossible choices that kept it breathing. The abandoned steel mill loomed ahead, skeletal structures of rusted metal rising from the shoreline like the bones of some industrial beast. Jamin aimed for a collapsed section of pier that might provide cover from the helicopter's spotlight. Behind them, Coast Guard vessels closed to within 200 yards. They weren't going to make it. Samantha watched the gap narrow with terrible clarity. In seconds, the pursuit boats would be close enough to fire warning shots, then disabling shots. Then, the explosion came from the direction of the Chicago shoreline. A massive fireball erupted from what looked like one of the Kang Syndicate's warehouse facilities near the port. The blast lit up the night sky like a second sun, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air. The helicopter immediately peeled off, racing back toward the city where a disaster was unfolding. The Coast Guard vessels slowed, radios crackling with urgent communications redirecting resources. And in that moment of chaos, Jamin drove their boat into the shadows beneath the rusted mill pier. He killed the engine. Darkness swallowed them. They sat in suffocating silence while the sounds of sirens and helicopter rotors echoed across the water. Samantha's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. What was that? She whispered. Marcus. Jamin's voice was flat. He set charges in the warehouse, gave us one last distraction. He's still alive, probably not for long. Jamin pulled out his phone, miraculously still functional despite everything, and checked a message that had just come through. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went dark. He says goodbye, says he's tired of running, that this is where it ends for him. Samantha felt something twist in her chest. Marcus had betrayed them, sold them out, tried to auction them to the highest bidder. But in the end, he'd given them a chance to escape. "We have to go back," she said quietly. "We can't save him. We can try. He doesn't want to be saved." Jamin showed her the phone screen. The message was longer than he'd said. "He's asking us to do what he couldn't. Get out, start over, live the kind of life men like us never get to live." He looked at Samantha. "He's giving us permission to be better than what we were." Tears burned behind Samantha's eyes. "I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I." Jamin reached for her hand. "But we figure it out together, or we die trying." They waited in the darkness beneath the pier for 30 minutes while emergency response consumed Chicago's shoreline. Fire trucks, police, federal agents redirected to the warehouse explosion. The chaos Marcus had created was buying them time measured in stolen moments. Finally, when the immediate pursuit had shifted away, Jamin started the engine again and guided them along the shoreline, staying close to the industrial ruins where shadows could hide them. 2 miles north, they found what they were looking for, a small marina serving a handful of private boat owners who clearly didn't care much about security. Jamin pulled into an empty slip and cut the engine. "We need to disappear before dawn," he said. "Every law enforcement agency in Illinois will be looking for us by sunrise." "How?" Samantha's voice was hollow with exhaustion. "We have no money, no identification, nowhere to go." Not exactly true. Jamin climbed out of the boat and helped her onto the dock. "I have emergency caches scattered across the Midwest. Cash. Fake IDs. Untraceable vehicles. I've been preparing for catastrophic failure since the day I took control of the organization." He looked back at the Chicago skyline, still glowing with fires. "I just never thought the catastrophe would look like this." They walked through the quiet marina toward a parking lot where a handful of vehicles sat unattended. Jamin checked each one methodically until he found an older sedan with a broken door lock. He had them inside and the engine hot-wired within 2 minutes. "Where did you learn that?" Samantha asked. "Before I was a king, I was just a kid stealing cars in Koreatown." He pulled out of the parking lot carefully, keeping his speed exactly at the limit. Funny how everything comes full circle. They drove north through suburbs that looked peaceful and ordinary. Houses with lights and windows, families sleeping safely, lives untouched by the violence that had consumed theirs. Samantha watched the world pass outside her window and felt the enormous weight of everything they'd lost pressing down on her chest. The empire was gone. The organization destroyed. Everyone they'd known either dead, arrested, or scattered. They were fugitives now, running from law enforcement and organized crime in equal measure. And somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. "I need you to understand something," Jamin said quietly as they crossed into Wisconsin. "What comes next won't be easy. We'll be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives, moving every few months, new names, new faces, always waiting for the moment someone recognizes us." "I know. You'll never be able to contact your family again, never use your real name, never have the kind of normal life you had before I destroyed it." That life wasn't living. Samantha looked at him. It was just existing, being invisible, waiting to die without ever actually being seen. She pressed her hand against her stomach. "This baby means I'll never be invisible again. And neither will you." Jamin's expression cracked slightly. "I don't know how to be anything except what I was." "Then we learn together." They drove for hours, putting distance between themselves and Chicago, following back roads through small towns that wouldn't have security cameras, or curious cops looking for expensive boats stolen from marinas. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the first emergency cache, a storage unit in a forgettable Wisconsin town, registered under a false name, paid up for years in advance. Inside, they found everything Jamin had promised: duffel bags stuffed with cash, multiple sets of identification documents, prepaid phones, changes of clothes, a reliable Toyota with clean plates parked in the back corner. Samantha stared at the evidence of just how long Jamin had been preparing for this moment. "You knew this was coming. I knew it was possible." He pulled out 2 sets of IDs. Driver's licenses, passports, social security cards, all expertly forged. James and Sarah Mitchell, married couple from Minnesota. Boring, ordinary, forgettable. He handed her the documents. That's who we are now. Samantha looked at the license photo, some woman who resembled her vaguely, but the name felt like wearing someone else's skin. Sarah Mitchell, she said quietly, testing the words. They tasted wrong, like lies she'd have to learn to believe. We don't have to do this, Jamin said suddenly. I can turn myself in. Negotiate a deal where you get immunity in exchange for testifying against me. You'd be safe, protected. The baby would grow up free. And you'd spend life in prison. I've done things that deserve prison. His voice was flat. You haven't. You were just someone who got caught in my orbit, someone I should have protected instead of dragging into my war. Samantha turned to face him fully. Jamin Kang, the man who'd terrified her for 3 years with his cold authority, who'd saved her life twice, who'd chosen her over his empire, looked utterly exhausted, broken, like someone who'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. You're not doing this alone, she said firmly. I made my choices, crawled through gunfire for you, stood beside you when your own organization wanted me dead. This baby, she pressed her hand against her stomach, is half yours, which means we figure out how to be parents together, or we don't figure it out at all. You don't understand what you're signing up for. Yes, I understand perfectly. Samantha's voice was steady now. I'm signing up for a life where I'm seen, where I matter, where someone chose me over everything else. She stepped closer. I spent 30 years being invisible. I'm not going back to that, ever. Jamin stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her against his chest and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to smoke. I don't deserve you, he whispered into her hair. Probably not. Samantha's arms wrapped around him. But you're stuck with me anyway. They stayed like that while dawn light filtered through the storage unit's single dirty window, holding on to each other in the wreckage of everything they'd lost and everything they'd chosen to save. Finally, Jamin pulled back and looked at the supplies he'd prepared. We need to move, change vehicles, ditch anything that can be traced. He glanced at her. And you need medical attention. Make sure the baby's okay after everything tonight. Samantha had been trying not to think about that. The running, the stress, the violence, any of it could have caused complications she was too terrified to acknowledge. There's a clinic 2 hours from here, Jamin continued. Cash only. No questions asked. I've used them before for injured men who couldn't risk hospitals. He saw her expression. They're discreet. And they're good. The doctor won't report anything. And after that, we drive until we hit the Canadian border. Cross somewhere remote where border patrol is thin. I have contacts in Montreal who can get us established. New identities, new life. He loaded duffel bags into the Toyota's trunk. It's not much, but it's a start. They spent the next hour transforming themselves into James and Sarah Mitchell. Changed clothes. Burned everything that connected them to their old identities. Memorized the details on their fake documents until they could recite them without thinking. By the time they pulled out of the storage facility in the unremarkable Toyota, Samantha Vale and Jamin Kang had ceased to exist. In their place were 2 ordinary people fleeing ordinary problems, forgettable enough to disappear into the vast anonymity of North America. The clinic Jamin had mentioned sat in a small town 2 hours north, a modest building that looked more like a house than a medical facility. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and no questions checked Samantha over with practiced efficiency. You're about 4 weeks along, the doctor said quietly. Fetal heartbeat is strong. No signs of distress, despite what looks like significant physical trauma recently. She gave Samantha a pointed look. You need rest, proper nutrition, and you need to avoid whatever caused those bruises. I will, Samantha promised. I've heard that before. The doctor handed her prenatal vitamins and a list of nutritional guidelines. Take care of yourself. That baby is depending on you. After the appointment, they drove north through the day, stopping only for gas and cheap food eaten in parking lots. Jamin had transformed into someone Samantha barely recognized. Quiet, careful, constantly checking mirrors for pursuit that never materialized. They crossed into Canada late that evening at a remote border crossing where the agent barely glanced at their documents before waving them through. And just like that, they were free. Or as free as fugitives ever got. Montreal at night was a blur of lights and foreign French that Samantha couldn't understand. Jaemin navigated to a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood where nobody paid attention to anyone else's business. The apartment he'd arranged was small, one bedroom, cramped kitchen, furniture that looked like it had survived several decades of tenants who didn't care. Nothing like the mansion or even Samantha's old studio. But it was theirs. "We'll stay here a few months," Jaemin said, setting their bags on the worn couch. "Long enough to establish ourselves. Then we move somewhere more permanent." He looked around the shabby space. "I'm sorry it's perfect." Samantha meant it. The apartment had no security cameras, no bodyguards, no enemies trying to kill them through the walls. "It's the first place I've felt safe in weeks." That night, they lay together in the narrow bed, neither of them sleeping despite the exhaustion crushing down on them. Samantha's head rested against Jaemin's chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong, proof that they'd both survived the impossible. "What happens if they find us?" she whispered into the darkness. "We run again." His arms tightened around her. "As many times as it takes." "And if there's nowhere left to run, then we make our stand." His voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "And we make damn sure our child survives, even if we don't." Samantha pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling the small life growing there, the baby that had started this entire catastrophic chain of events, the future they were both fighting to protect. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "Anything. If it comes down to choosing between me and the baby, Don't." Jaemin's voice turned sharp. "Don't ask me to make that choice. Someone has to make it, and I'm telling you right now." Samantha looked up at him in the darkness. "You choose the baby, always, no matter what." Jaemin's jaw clenched. "I've spent my entire life making ruthless decisions, choosing strategy over sentiment, survival over loyalty. I won't do that with you." "You have to." "I won't." He cupped her face gently. "You and that baby are the only things I have left in this world. I'm not sacrificing either of you to save the other. We survive together, or we don't survive at all." Samantha wanted to argue, to make him understand that her life mattered less than the future she was carrying, but the look in his eyes told her this was one battle she wouldn't win. So instead, she kissed him, soft and desperate, and full of all the words she couldn't say. And for one night, in a cramped Montreal apartment 600 miles from the empire they'd fled, Samantha and Jaemin allowed themselves to pretend they were just two ordinary people starting a family, untouched by violence and blood. The months that followed were the strangest of Samantha's life. She and Jaemin, James and Sarah Mitchell now, names they forced themselves to use even in private, settled into a routine that looked almost normal from the outside. He found work doing construction, cash under the table, keeping his head down and his past buried. She took online classes in accounting, building credentials that would help her find legitimate work eventually. They moved through their days carefully, never drawing attention, never staying in one place too long, always watching for the signs that someone had found them. The pregnancy progressed. Samantha's body changed, growing round with the child that had cost them everything and given them everything in return. Jaemin was obsessively protective, monitoring her health, making sure she ate properly, preparing for the baby's arrival with the same meticulous attention to detail he'd once applied to criminal logistics. Some nights Samantha would wake to find him standing at the window, staring out at the city, his expression haunted by ghosts she couldn't see. "Tell me what you're thinking," she'd whisper, and he'd come back to bed and pull her close and say nothing, because some thoughts were too dark to speak aloud. 6 months after fleeing Chicago, Samantha gave birth to a daughter in a small Montreal hospital under Sarah Mitchell's false name. The labor was long and brutal and terrifying. But when the doctor finally placed the tiny, screaming infant in Samantha's arms, everything else, the pain, the fear, the impossible journey that had brought them here, faded into insignificance. Their daughter was perfect. Dark hair like her father, strong lungs, eyes that would eventually settle into some shade between Samantha's brown and Jaemin's black. Jaemin stood beside the hospital bed staring at his daughter with an expression Samantha had never seen before. Absolute wonder, mixed with terror, at the responsibility now resting in their hands. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's ours." Samantha adjusted the baby in her arms. What do we call her? They discussed names for months without reaching consensus. Korean names felt too connected to Jaemin's past. American names felt too generic. Everything they considered seemed weighted with meaning they couldn't escape. Grace, Jaemin said finally. We call her Grace because that's what she is. The thing neither of us deserved, but received anyway. Samantha looked at her daughter, Grace Mitchell, born to parents who didn't legally exist, carrying a future neither could predict, and felt something in her chest finally settle into place. This was why they'd run, why they'd survived, why they'd chosen each other over everything else. Not for power or money or empire. For this tiny life that depended on them both to be better than what they'd been. They brought Grace home to their small apartment and learned to be parents through trial and error and exhaustion. Jaemin proved surprisingly capable with diaper changes and midnight feedings. Samantha discovered reserves of patience she'd never known she possessed, and slowly, carefully, they built something that resembled a life. But the past never completely let go. 1 year after fleeing Chicago, Jaemin received a message on one of his encrypted phones, a device he'd kept despite knowing it was dangerous, unable to completely sever the connections to his former world. The message was from Min Seo, the federal agent who'd been embedded in his organization. Marcus Chen died in federal custody 6 months ago. Heart attack. The investigation into the Kang syndicate was closed 3 weeks ago due to lack of evidence. Most records destroyed, key witnesses dead or missing. The Santos crew was dismantled by a rival organization last month. Serena Kang is serving 15 years for conspiracy, but will likely die in prison due to terminal illness. You're not actively being hunted anymore. Thought you'd want to know. M. Jaemin showed Samantha the message without speaking. She read it twice, trying to process what it meant. They've stopped looking for us? The federal task force has, but there are always people looking, rivals, survivors, anyone who thinks we know where bodies are buried or money is hidden. Jaemin deleted the message. We can't let our guard down. Can we at least stop running? He looked at her for a long moment, then at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her crib, then back to Samantha. Maybe, he said quietly. Maybe we've run far enough. They decided to stay in Montreal, found a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, established themselves more permanently in their false identities. Jaemin opened a small construction business under James Mitchell's name. Samantha took an accounting position with a local firm. They were ordinary, boring, the kind of people nobody looked at twice. And for the first time in either of their lives, that invisibility felt like freedom instead of erasure. Grace grew, learned to walk, started speaking in a mix of English and French that delighted everyone except her parents, who could barely keep up. She had Samantha's smile and Jaemin's intensity, a small person who'd inherited the best and worst of both of them. On Grace's second birthday, Samantha and Jaemin stood in their apartment while their daughter tore into presents with gleeful determination and allowed themselves to acknowledge what they'd built from the ruins of what they'd lost. Do you regret it? Samantha asked quietly. Everything you gave up? Jaemin considered the question seriously. I regret the people who died, the trust I betrayed, the empire I burned. He looked at Grace, then at Samantha. But I don't regret choosing you. I'd do it again without hesitation. Even knowing how it would end? It hasn't ended. His hand found hers. This is just a different beginning. Samantha leaned against him, watching their daughter play with toys in an apartment that was safe and small and theirs. No bodyguards, no surveillance, no enemies plotting in shadows, just an ordinary family built from extraordinary circumstances. She thought about this woman she'd been 3 years ago, invisible, overlooked, buried beneath layers of self-protection that had kept her breathing but not living. That woman would never have survived what came after, would never have crawled through gunfire or confronted killers or run across state lines carrying a crime lord's child. That woman had died in a panic room soaked in blood and desperate intimacy. The woman who'd emerged was stronger, scarred, capable of surviving things she'd once thought impossible. I'm not invisible anymore, Samantha said quietly. Jaemin pulled her closer. You never were. I just wasn't looking properly. And now? Now I see everything. His voice was rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. And I spend every day grateful I didn't lose you when I lost everything else." Grace toddled over and demanded to be picked up. Jamin lifted her with easy strength, and Samantha watched them together, father and daughter, both carrying the weight of a past they couldn't escape, but learning to build a future that mattered more. Years later, when Grace was old enough to ask questions about where they came from and why they didn't have the same last name as her kindergarten forms claimed, Samantha would sit her down and tell her the truth in terms a child could understand. She'd explain that sometimes people made mistakes that changed everything, that survival required running toward the things that mattered instead of away from the things that scared you. That family wasn't always simple or easy or clean, but it was worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. And someday, when Grace was older, she'd tell her the full story, the panic room, the betrayals, the night Chicago burned while they fled across dark water toward an uncertain future. But for now, on a quiet afternoon in Montreal, where snow fell soft against windows and their small apartment smelled like birthday cake and new toys, Samantha simply held her daughter close and let herself believe in the possibility of ordinary happiness. Jaimeen stood behind them both, one hand resting on Samantha's shoulder, and for the first time since the empire collapsed, he allowed himself to breathe without waiting for the next disaster. They'd survived. Against every odd, every enemy, every catastrophic mistake and desperate choice, they'd survived. And that survival meant something. It meant Grace would grow up knowing her parents had chosen each other and her above everything else. It meant Samantha would never be invisible again, even in the quiet anonymity of their rebuilt lives. It meant Jamin could be more than the king of a criminal empire, more than the sum of violence and blood that had defined him. It meant they got to be human, flawed, damaged, carrying scars that would never fully heal, but human and alive and together. The snow continued falling outside their window, blanketing Montreal in white that covered the city's sins and secrets, offering the kind of fresh start that people like them rarely received but had somehow claimed anyway. Samantha pressed her face against Grace's hair and let the tears come, not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of having made it through the fire and finding something worth protecting on the other side. "We're okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to Jamin and Grace. "We're actually going to be okay." And in that moment, in that small apartment 600 miles from the empire that had tried to consume them both, Samantha Vale, Sarah Mitchell now, mother and survivor, and woman who'd learned that being seen meant being both vulnerable and invincible, finally believed it. The past would always linger in shadows. The fear would never completely fade. They'd spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, waiting for the moment someone recognized them. But they'd also spend those years watching Grace grow, building careers from nothing, learning to love each other in ways that weren't forged in violence and desperation. They'd spend those years being the family that neither of them had thought possible. And that, more than any empire, any power, any control over criminal operations that spanned cities, that was worth everything they'd lost and everything they'd gained. Jamin wrapped his arms around both of them, and in the warm circle of that embrace, Samantha finally understood what it meant to come home. Not to a place, not to a mansion or apartment or country, but to the people who saw you completely and chose to stay anyway. The people who'd burn empires to keep you safe. The people who'd run 600 miles through darkness and fear because losing you was worse than losing everything else. Grace squirmed free and toddled back to her toys, oblivious to the weight of the moment her parents were sharing. And Samantha and Jamin stood together in their small Montreal apartment, watching their daughter play, and silently acknowledged that this ordinary, beautiful, impossibly fragile life they'd built from ashes and blood and desperate choices was the only empire that had ever really mattered, the only victory worth claiming, the only future worth fighting for. And as snow continued to fall outside their window, covering the world in fresh white silence, Samantha Vale finally stopped running from who she'd been and embraced who she'd become. Not invisible, not an asset, not a target or a complication or a woman defined by other people's violence. Just Samantha, mother, survivor, woman who'd crawled through fire and found herself on the other side. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.